The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
And we are back. A long off season is here, but week one is here. We're going to be previewing our week one slate, and we got a busy schedule. Some people are playing cupcakes, but you know what? College football is college football, and we're going to take it. We're also going to dive into Vanderbilt's 35-28 victory over Hawaii last night, as the Doors are the first team to get into the win column. But joining me once again, I've lost track of how many seasons we've been doing this for, but Wade, you are back for probably your sixth season, probably as many years as JT Daniels has been on the field.
Yeah, I think a double redshirt senior at this point. I believe we started our junior year. I met you my sophomore year of college, So we had at least 3 years at LSU, and then we're coming up on our third season post-graduation, or my third season post-graduation. So yeah, it's been a little bit, but we're happy to be back. And, it's just great to see college football on TV.
Yeah, we mainly been on our Facebook page, but last year we implemented our YouTube community. So we have our Facebook community and also our YouTube community join us. So it's SEC Talk Nation has definitely been growing throughout the years, and we're going to continue to do bigger and better things into the 2023 season. And we will see if anybody can take down Georgia, the defending national champions. We'll see if they can three-peat. Has been done in quite some time. It hasn't been done in the AP poll era. And speaking of that AP poll, let's get into that. If you've been a fan of the show, we always start with this. And there's 6 SEC teams to start off this year's poll, the AP Top 25 poll. It will go on throughout the first couple of months, and then we'll shift our gears into the college football playoff poll. That's definitely going to be interesting next year whenever the field expands to 12. But no surprise to anybody, the defending national champs, the Georgia Bulldogs, or the number one team. There are some question marks. Carson Beck will be the starting quarterback, but that defense is going to be one of the best once again in the SEC. We had number 4, Alabama. That feels like it's been the lowest mark that Alabama has started in quite some time, but being number 4 is still pretty good, even with this is another team that's dealing with some quarterback concerns. We don't even know who Nick Saban's going to start week one. We probably won't know until game day. Then number 5 is LSU. Last year, we saw the Tigers not even start into the AP Top 25 poll. This year, they're in the top 5. A lot of high expectations in Brian Kelly's second year with LSU. And then we have number 12, Tennessee. Tennessee was the talk of the town in the SEC in 2022. Could they be this year in the SEC East? I think that a lot of people are riding Joe Milton in this offense. I think that this offense with Josh Heupel once again is going to be really good. And then you have 2 SEC West teams coming out of the gates here. Number 22, Ole Miss, a lot of talent returning on both sides of the ball. And then number 23, Texas A&M. It wouldn't be an AP Top 25 poll with Texas A&M being in it last year that they start the season number 6. They had a 5-7 season last year, so the Aggies and Jimbo Fisher will be looking to redeem themselves in the 2023 season. So looking at this AP Top 25 poll, is there any team that stands out to you maybe being too high or too low?
Well, first off, I think Texas A&M checking in at number 23, finally feels appropriate. Like no more top 10 expectations. I think you could argue this team's a top 25 team, so I have no issues there. I think South Carolina is a team that I kind of expected to be ranked, maybe to snag the 25 spot. I wouldn't worry about it if I was a Gamecock fan because it's the game coming up on Saturday is one of those games where if you beat UNC, you're going to jump into the top 25, probably even the top 15. But if you were to lose and you started off the season ranked, you would fall out. So plenty to play for the Gamecocks. And then I think just looking at it though, this is as balanced as it's been between the East and the West in a while. I mean, assuming a team like South Carolina or Kentucky could enter the poll, the West is pretty wide open. I mean, you see Alabama at number 4, and LSU shortly behind them there at number 5. So often we're used to seeing Alabama automatically in that number 1 or 2 spot. So kind of feels like we have something to debate this year, and that's refreshing.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be refreshing. And next year we're going to have Oklahoma and Texas is here. So, this could be the final time that we see like teams like an Ole Miss, like a Texas A&M be in the discussion because, a juggernaut like Texas or Oklahoma could definitely kick them to the curb. But we'll keep track. If you've been a fan of this show too, we keep up with AP Top 25 poll. We try to update that. We use that whenever we look at our previews and matchups. So we will be continuing to watch this poll week in and week out. So the next one is just a quick reminder to everybody watching the show. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about the SEC, we're an open community. So if you have anything to say in the comments, definitely reach out to them. We had an answering questions segment, but since we're now using StreamYard where we could just pop in questions as we go, we eliminated that one this season. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop us in, and then we will sit down and chat with y'all throughout the show. All right, let's get into our next segment, which is going to bring us to SEC Fantasy. Some new sponsors this season for us. Our friend Josh Smiler, he has a very good show, rising to the occasion. If you want to use his products, don't wait to try out your new favorite golf apparel. You can upgrade your golf attire with Miler Bros Golf. Get 15% off at Miler Bros Golf apparel and gear. Definitely check them out. They definitely have some nice golf and apparel. If you're just, a beginner or a pro, whatever level, they definitely have the stuff for you and your next golfing outing. All right, let's get into SEC Fantasy. Wade, this is really one of the main reasons we had this is you brought this on. Definitely think this was a great idea, and this is going to continue. Maybe a little bit a twist throughout the season. We'll definitely keep that in mind. But if you're new to the show, how we do it is you get 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, and 1 defense. And our rule that we implemented last year is you cannot use a player you picked from last week. So say you pick Will Rogers this week, you can't pick him next week and when they take on Arizona. So let's get it right into it. At the quarterback position, Wade, since he won the 2023 bowl season, I gave him the first pick, and he used his first pick on a Gamecock here with Spencer Rattler facing off against the Tar Heels.
Yeah, I went with a bold pick here, and Spencer Rattler. I think that South Carolina and UNC, to me, could be a high-paced shootout type of football game. I think just with it being a neutral site, 2 really high-powered offenses led through the quarterback position with Rattler and Drake May at UNC. I mean, I just think that this has every bit of the making of a shootout, and I think Rattler can put up some big-time passing numbers for me to start off the season.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are buying into this South Carolina team, and it's definitely – I like this pick. We saw North Carolina's defense wasn't really too good, so I think that Spencer Rattler could definitely have a good day. And then I'm going to go with a new face at Tennessee. I think that we saw a lot of Hendon Hooker in SEC Fantasy this year. I feel like Joe Milton is going to be the same one. They're going up against Virginia. Virginia is going to be one of those teams that are going to be the bottom of the ACC. The ACC is just so top heavy. I just think that Joe Milton, we have seen his arm talent. We saw it at the Manning Passing Academy. We saw it in the Orange Bowl against Clemson. So I think even with losing Jalen Hyde, I think that there's definitely a lot of weapons surrounding Joe Milton. So give me Joe Milton's arm strength versus Virginia. So those are 2 SEC East quarterbacks to get us started. Hello, Sarah. Thank you for joining in. I hope you are having a great Sunday so far. Let's get on to the running backs. You're going to go with a Georgia dog, the Kendall Milton, and then I'm going to go with Quinshon Judkins. Judkins was the name that we saw a lot throughout the season, but another new face with you taking Milton in week number 1.
Yeah, I just think that Georgia is going to come out the gate running the football. They will be introducing a new quarterback for the first time in a few seasons in Carson Beck. So I'm going with the familiar face here in the program, Kendall Milton. Georgia's been loaded at running back for quite some time. Kind of seems like a down year in the running back room for the Bulldogs, but I think that's mainly because Milton's just been buried on the depth chart. He's quite talented, and I think he'll do some damage as a runner and then as a receiver out the backfield. Of course, we're just looking at rushing yards to keep it simple, but I think that he'll be a nice safety blanket for Carson Beck as he gets used to being Georgia's new QB.
Yeah, I think that especially in week one, Georgia might not show everything itself. So it would not surprise me if they just completely just run the ball. I'm going to go with Quinshon Judkins. Week one, we usually like to go with the star power in week number one since a lot of the teams aren't facing formidable opponents. Ole Miss offense was really reliable on Quinshon Judkins, the freshman. He won the SEC Freshman Award for our show. He also won, All-American. He's on the preseason All-American. So I think that Judkins, Ole Miss definitely has some star talent in the quarterback. Their quarterback room is absolutely loaded with three guys that can start anywhere else. But I think that Judkins is definitely going to get the work that's going to build my team for week number one. So let's go on now to the pass catchers. We definitely have also some new faces in the pass catching department. We have Jalen High, we no longer have him. We'd also have some new bloods too. We have Ja'Cory Brooks. He's a returner, but I'm not even going to pronounce this guy's first name. I
figured it out. I looked it up.
Did you figure it out? What's his first name?
So it's Lidetrick. I thought it was Lidetrick, but it's Lidetrick. Yeah, and he goes by Tutu.
Okay. Tutu Griffin. I'll call him Tutu. So we have Tutu and Ja'Cory Brooks. Brooks is going up against Middle Tennessee State.
Yep. So Brooks, I think a lot of people expected him to step right in for Jamison Williams, Devontae Smith, the long list of Alabama wide receivers. So he didn't quite have that impact season. I think he's a transfer from Miami, so he's still kind of getting used to the program, or maybe he's not a transfer, but I think he is from Miami in high school. But, just kind of getting his footing there in Alabama. Wasn't quite the star they needed last year. I think he still was their leading receiver, but I think this year he'll be much more accustomed to the role, and I see him having a big year for Alabama, and they're going to need it because this is the least talent Alabama's had at quarterback in probably 7 or 8 years. So, they're going to need to have some good routes here from Brooks and just kind of feed him the ball. It might be some catch and runs. I can already picture him breaking off like a 60-yard touchdown on an 8-yard pass or something. So I like the familiarity there with Brooks.
Yeah, the wide receivers for Alabama are going to have to get going with Brooks and Burton returning. Those are going to be the top two guys, especially with the tight end Latu going to the NFL. I went with Griffin, Mississippi State. I think that, even with Mike Leach being gone, definitely prayers go out to his family till we'll still remember the Leach family throughout this season. Mississippi State, with Will Rogers, I think that he's one of the most underrated football quarterbacks. We've spent a lot of time talking about Will Rogers. So I think that he's going to throw it to somebody. And I think that Griffin is going to be his top two guy. Especially with Jalen Wally leaving. That was definitely an SEC fantasy, queen right there. So I think that Griffin is definitely going to do well, especially against the Southeastern Louisiana line defense that struggled and lost some talent on the secondary. Zion Alexander is now with LSU. That was one of their top guys. So I think that Griffin is going to be the king of SEC fantasy this year. Would not surprise me if we saw him once again throughout this season. So let's now go on to the defenses. This is where your week can either go to crap or turn out great for you. So I think that week number one, it's pretty hard to not turn out great. You're going to go for Tennessee defense that's going up against a Virginia offense that struggled, and I'm going with Alabama against the Blue Raiders of Middle Tennessee State.
Yeah, I like Tennessee in this one. As you touched on, Virginia they're not going to be very good this year. They're going to be one of the lower tier Power 5 schools. And Tennessee really impressed me defensively the last time we saw this team. I know, they've gotten some new members. Guys have gone on to the NFL or transferred or graduated. But this team looked really good against Clemson in the Orange Bowl. They let up 14 points to a much better offense than the one they'll face in the Cavaliers. So I think they can, pick up right where they left off. And I'm not saying they're going to pitch a shutout because that's hard to do week one, but I think they can hold Virginia under 14.
I definitely agree with that. I think that Tennessee's defense, throughout the season last year was criticized, but I think that they really did a good job of finishing out the season throughout the game against, South Carolina. They really did well against Vanderbilt, and then they really shut down Cade Klubniak and that offense. I'm going to go with Alabama's defense. I could have gone with, Georgia versus UT Martin, but I just don't really feel good about myself picking SEC defense going up against the FCS team. So I know it's, Middle Tennessee State,
Kind of an
but
unwritten
Alabama
rule.
defense, I think that a lot of people are, saying, of course, about their quarterback, but I think that Alabama defense, they could definitely be right up there with Georgia's defense. I think that's going to be a 1-2 punch for them. Dallas Turner's returning. They did lose Will Anderson. They lost Brian Branch, but they were returning a lot of guys still on this defense. This is going to be a talented Crimson Tide defense to watch this season. So Tennessee and Alabama are the two defenses that we're going to be facing. Tune in next week, and who wins and takes week number 1 should be a high score matchup. Week 1 is usually one of the easier ones. And then once we get into the conference play, that's whenever picking the defenses get a little tough. So like I mentioned at the start of the show, we do have one game to get into. Week 0 got started last night. It was a pretty boring schedule, but, like we say here, college football is college football. An FCS versus an FCS matchup, and we'll still watch it. So our SEC Week 0 recap is presented by our friends over at SeatGeek. You can get $20 off your purchase, your first purchase, that being using code BELLYUPSPORTS. That's all uppercase BELLYUPSPORTS to get $20 off of your first purchase. So let's get into it. We had Vanderbilt versus Hawaii, and it was a complete 360 of this game. Vanderbilt, you see the score there, 35-28. But if you look at last year's matchup against, the Warriors and the Rainbow Warriors and the Commodores, Vanderbilt put up 63 points. This was not a 63-point showing. We see our player of the game going to AJ Swan, quarterback for Vanderbilt. He had 19 for 30, 258 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. Early on, it was looking like Vanderbilt was going to take this game pretty easily, but Hawaii, they were just bouncing back. But in the end, Vanderbilt was able to get this one. I think that the main question is, I think that a lot of people saw that this Vanderbilt team, they picked up a couple of really good wins down the stretch. They beat Florida. They ended up losing to Tennessee pretty handily. But 5-7 last year, people are saying, okay, this team is returning their quarterback, returning some guys on offense. Their defense improved at times last season. But after this showing, are you still believing that Vanderbilt can get that 6th win this season?
I think it was going to be an uphill battle regardless. But, yeah, I wanted to see this team come out the gates a little bit better. They're featured on SEC Network. Anybody that's into college football and didn't have things going on last night was tuning in to this game. And it was really Vanderbilt's time to shine. I get that the weather was bad and, that might have just thrown a wrench in some things. But overall, this was a pretty sloppy showing, and you would have liked to see Vanderbilt put away a team like Hawaii. They do have a cupcake game coming up this week, and then they'll have kind of an out-of-conference rivalry game in Wake Forest coming up. So they really need to shape things up this week at home before they go on the road to Wake Forest, because if they want to get to 6 wins, they got to pretty much go undefeated out of conference.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And Chet chimes in as of right now. Vandy is top of the SEC. We will see if that lasts. So all of our
By
SEC,
default, right?
all of our SEC friends will get underway here. And like you mentioned, Vanderbilt will return home to their home stadium. They will host Alabama A&M. We'll see. That should be an easy win. They get to 2-0. Like you mentioned, they get Wake Forest, a Wake Forest team without Sam Hartman. We saw Sam Hartman's debut against Notre Dame. That was definitely eye-opening for a lot of Notre Dame fans. They are definitely not used to that level of play at quarterback for quite some time. But Vanderbilt, I definitely think they're going to go 2-0. And then you go on the road to Wake Forest. Last year, they got blown out. I think that it could be a definitely closer matchup, especially without the quarterback play that Wake Forest doesn't have anymore. So that is our only Week 0 game that we had in the SEC. Let's flip our attention now to Week 1. And our Week 1 SEC preview is presented by Fanatics. You can use our Fanatics link to support your teams. You can use whatever code it is. Sometimes it's 65% off. Sometimes it's free shipping. Fanatics, definitely use our code down there. I know it's scrolling across your screen there. So when the next time that you see it scrolling across, definitely go ahead and go over there. It's the new season. You need your new gear for your favorite SEC team. So go on over there in Fanatics and support our favorite podcast. All right, let's get into it. This is one of my favorites to get into our weekly picks. Week 1 is usually easy. The records are definitely easy, pretty much locked to go over 500 unless something wild happens. But our first matchup is on Thursday. We do have two SEC teams getting into action on Thursday. The first one being Florida taking on number 14 Utah. We saw this matchup last year, and it was a shocking defeat for Utah. Florida with Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson was probably his best game of the season last year, as Florida knocked off number 7 Utah last year. This time, Utah looks for some revenge. We'll see if Cam Rising plays in this one. He tore his ACL against Penn State in the Rose Bowl. Florida is debuting a new quarterback, Graham Mertz, coming in from Florida. Not from Florida. Obviously, he's coming to Florida. He's coming from Wisconsin. But the defense is definitely going to be a question mark for this Gators team. So who do you have in this one? You have the Gators going 2-0, or do you have Utah getting their revenge in a place that's very hard to win, especially at night?
I think that ultimately these teams will split the 2-year series here. I think that geographically, this is just a really hard matchup to come steal a win on the road. I think Utah is very much the better team last year, but they had the disadvantage of traveling down south, playing in the humidity. I think it might have even had rained a little bit in Gainesville, definitely 90 plus. So I think that set up pretty badly for Utah. I think traveling up to Utah is a little bit better on the humidity side, but now you're dealing with the change in elevation that these Florida guys just simply aren't ready for. But above all, I think Utah doesn't want to go 0-2 in this series, and I think they are the much better football team. It would be interesting to see if Rising plays, but I think anybody Utah puts out there can handle what Graham Mertz and Florida can bring to the table.
Yeah, it's sounding early on that Cam Rising isn't going to play in this one, but I just trust Utah's defense more than Florida this season. I'm just not haven't been a fan much of Graham Mertz. Florida's going to run the football with Etienne coming back. I think that Florida is going to be a run-first offense. So we'll see if Graham Mertz, if it changes system, Wisconsin, they're the same way. They just handed off to Braden Allen so many times, but he definitely has the offensive firepower to be a better quarterback and better system fit at Florida. But Utah, I think that this one is definitely needed for them. The Pac-12 is loaded at the top. So I think that this is going to be a close game. But like you mentioned, you brought up a good point. This isn't the same humidity that Florida is traveling to Utah. Utah traveled last year and it was like 90, feeling like 100 degrees. And they were like, what is going on? We're not used to this. And we're like, what is this? But I think that Utah, like I mentioned, this is one of the toughest environments to play in, especially at night. So I think that Utah and their home crowd is going to feed off of it. Coming off of a Pac-12 championship, I think that their eyes are set on it once again. So I'm going to go with the Utes. Our upset specialist is back. We'll see if he has one this week, but not in game number 1. We're all going with Utah. So going against the SEC here usually doesn't happen often, but this is definitely a tough environment to go to. So we're going to go all 3 going with Utah. So let's go on now to the next Thursday night game. Features an FCS versus SEC opponent, South Dakota at Missouri. Shouldn't take a lot of thought about this one. You're going to go with Missouri.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Missouri. They're probably not a team we're going to talk about for being in contention in the SEC this year, but I do like what Brady Cook brings to the table. They brought in some competition for him, but I think he'll ultimately remain the starter for the time being, and I think they get off to a good start here. 1-0.
Yeah, Brady Cook coming back, but you're also losing Dominic Lovett, one of their top receivers, and then their defense continues to be, up and down throughout the season. But I think against the Coyotes, that they get the job done here. I think that Missouri starts off 1-0. It's a pretty easy matchup. I mean, week 1, there's going to be some games that we get more into, but games like this, it's just a quick pick. It's pretty much going to be like a 56-7 game, not going to be too close. And Chet is also going to go with the Missouri Tigers. So a clean sweep there. As we go on now to our next game, this is going to be the first game of our Saturday slate. Wake up early, Tennessee Vol fans. It's an 11 o'clock kickoff. Virginia at number 12, Tennessee. Virginia, like I mentioned, not getting a lot of hype in the ACC. Tennessee, though, could be one of those teams, Georgia, everyone loves to talk about, but Tennessee could definitely be right up there as they're going to host Georgia later on the season. But are you, this matchup doesn't really feel like it's going to be a matchup that's going to be close. So are you going to go with Tennessee in a blowout here?
Yeah, I think Tennessee maybe takes a little bit to get their offense rolling under Milton, but ultimately, I think Virginia is no match offensively. Like I said, when I picked Tennessee's defense, I think they could hold Virginia under 14 points. So I'm actually going to go Tennessee 34, Virginia 7.
Yeah, I wouldn't be picking Joe Milton for my SEC fantasy quarterback, not picking Tennessee. So I think that Tennessee is going to win this game 100%. I'll go 37. I think that 37-10. Virginia offense will probably get a garbage touchdown, but I think that Tennessee's defense is just going to be too much. There's just too much talent on the defensive side. I think that Tennessee's offense, even with Hendon Hooker not being there, there's some people saying, oh, Hendon Hooker's gone. They're not going to be, their offense is going to be good. But with Josh Heupel still calling the plays, he's an offensive guru. I think that Tennessee gets the job done at home against Virginia. And Chet is going to continue to agree with us. There's going to be a lot of agreements in week number 1. We're all going to go with Rocky Top to begin their season on the right note. And we're going to go on to our next matchup. It's not really a great slate here in week number 1. It's probably one of the poor week 1 slates. We have a top 10 matchup. We have, South Carolina, North Carolina. But outside of that, it's not very much. So we have the next one being Ball State at Kentucky. Kentucky with Devin Leary coming into the mix from NC State. That's definitely going to be an exciting time there in Lexington. So do you have Kentucky getting on the right note here against Ball State?
Yeah, I do. I think that Kentucky, they typically take care of business in a matchup like this. I do think pretty highly of Devin Leary coming to Kentucky. I mean, I thought he might end up in Tuscaloosa or somewhere more marquee. So for Kentucky to have him, I think that's tremendous for their team, and I think they can get off on a good note here and start the season 1-0.
Yeah, I think that Kentucky could definitely be a dark horse once again in the SEC East. I think that Devin Leary has the experience for them. That's definitely what they needed, especially now that with Will Levis going on to the NFL draft. I think that this is not even going to be close either. I think that, Ball State has been one of those very good teams in the MAC. I wouldn't be surprised if at the half it's close. But I think in the second half, Kentucky, their defense gets a timely turnover to really flip the momentum. So I'm going to go with Kentucky winning at home. And Chet is also going to go with Big Blue Nation. So all Big Blue going on in week number 1. Let's go on now to the next matchup. It continues to be a dud and dud in week number 1. Mercer at number 22, Ole Miss. Shouldn't even take a couple of words to get this pick.
Yeah, it's all Ole Miss here for me, but interestingly enough, Ole Miss does have a game against Tulane next week that we'll definitely be looking forward to previewing, and then they play Georgia Tech, I think, at some point. So their games are coming, but this is just a tune-up.
Yeah, just a tune-up. Mercer got their first win of the season yesterday against North Alabama, 17-7 after a brief lightning delay. Ole Miss and their offense is just going to be too much for them. Mercer didn't really impress me yesterday against North Alabama. Their offense just really struggled against North Alabama defense that continues to improve with a new head coach. Ole Miss, like you mentioned, that game against Tulane, and it is at Tulane. Tulane this week will face off against South Alabama. So we'll see if the Green Wave can get off to 1-0. But we're all going with the Rebels to beat Mercer in this one. So let's go on to the next one. It continues to be not great of a slate here in week number 1. UMass got the win yesterday against New Mexico State, got their first win against a Power 5 team, and it feels like quite some time for the Minutemen. And
Those
Auburn,
two are the forgotten Power 5 teams. They're like two of the 5 independent teams, so they actually play every year now. UMass and New Mexico State, quite the cross-country rivalry.
Yeah, well, they have to go to a very hostile environment in Jordan Hare Stadium. It's going to be a new face at quarterback with Peyton Thorne. He's going to be the starting quarterback, Michigan State transfer quarterback, and also Hugh Freeze coming back to the SEC. So I think that Auburn's going to be one of those dark horse teams that you don't want to face every week. I just feel like with Hugh Freeze being at the helm, he knows how to beat Alabama. So he knows how to beat the big boys in the SEC, and he starts off against the Minutemen. Will this even be close?
Well, I'm going to take Auburn, but yes, I do think it's going to be closer than the line indicates. UMass, I mean, they put up 45 points yesterday on New Mexico State in a road win, so they do have the advantage of having already played. And I don't see Auburn being that great this year. I think they could get to a bowl game, but I think it's going to take them a little bit of time to get their footing out of the gate with the new quarterback, the new offensive system. So I don't think they're going to blow the doors off of UMass. I do think they'll win, but I think it's going to be more in the lines of like 38-17.
Yeah, UMass was impressive. They put up 45 points against a St. New Mexico State team that went to the Quick Lane Bowl and won that bowl game last year. I think that Auburn, I think that their threshold, they just feel like 7-5, 8-4. I think that they could definitely get to that. It's definitely great that they don't have to face Penn State this year. They do have to face Georgia, which is definitely going to be a tough game for them. They have to face Alabama, LSU. Their schedule isn't very easy. So I think that they have to get the wins when they can. I think that they get this one pretty convincingly against UMass. I think that UMass will be able to put up some points, but Auburn with Peyton Thorne, Tank Bigsby no longer being there. So who's going to be their starting running back? Who's going to be the guy to step up? I think that their defense is going to continue to be right there. They struggled last year, which was very surprising, an Auburn defense, but after the coaching staff, they just didn't really believe in them. I think that the team really just gave up on them. They just said, we want Brian Harsin out of here. Give me Hugh Freeze. So I think that this is going to be an improvement. Auburn team is going to start right here in week 1 against UMass. And Chet's going to continue to be in the same line with us. Going to go with Auburn. So the next one that we have is Western Carolina at Arkansas. This should be a clean sweep of the Hogs once again.
Woo, pig, suey.
I like that. But obviously, Arkansas, KJ Jefferson, Raheem Sanders, I definitely think that's going to definitely be one of the go-to punches for Arkansas. Arkansas, we always talk about in the start. Every single year that, the past years, 5-0, 6-0, they get to the Texas A&M game. Some years they won that. Some years they lost it. So Arkansas, is one of those teams that can get out to the gate. They do have to face LSU early on. That's definitely going to be environment for them. So are you liking this Arkansas team? Could they be a contender in the West?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to win the West, but I think they're in the same tier as Texas A&M and Ole Miss and Mississippi State, depending on how you view Mississippi State. I'm not as high on them as some other analysts are, but I do think that, Arkansas, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, all have the potential to go maybe 9-3. And a lot of it's because of the veteran leadership and Jefferson and Sanders. I mean, Sanders was a guy that we were saying our goodbyes to on SEC Fantasy last year in December, and then you and I looked up and saw that he was only a sophomore. So we're thrilled, and I know Arkansas is thrilled to have him back for another year. I mean, I think he's definitely a big-time pro prospect, and then Jefferson is just one of those guys who could, just have a fantastic senior season. Really experienced. I mean, he's been playing there. I guess he's been the starter for the 5 years. So definitely his time to shine.
Yeah, it feels like half of the conference is, debuted new quarterbacks, and Arkansas is one of them that has the experience. So I think that could definitely turn in some more wins, going up against an SEC team that's debuting a quarterback versus a guy that's been in your locker room for quite some time. So let's continue on. We have Southeastern Louisiana facing off against Mississippi State with Zach Arnett being the head coach now for Mississippi State. It's a new era for the Bulldogs, and they face off against Southeastern Louisiana before they take the long road trip to the Pac-12 and face off against Arizona. So do you have the Bulldogs going to 1-0?
Yeah, I do. I think Mississippi State will handle business here. Southeastern is always a pretty good team out of the Southland Conference. I think they played Ole Miss last year. This time they get the Bulldogs, and I think Mississippi State wins. I'm just kind of curious to see what the Bulldogs' identity will be. Obviously nobody could prepare for the tragic news around Mike Leach, and I think they made the right decision just staying internally and promoting Zach Arnett. But I'm very curious to see if he'll keep that same offensive scheme, and if he does, if they're able to execute it to the level they did under Leach. So I kind of see there being growing pains for this team. I think they'll step it up defensively, and I think they'll be pesky enough to, win 7 ball games or so, this being one of them.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I do think that they get off on the right track here, beat a Southeast Louisiana team that struggled last season. We'll see if the Lions can have a better 2023 season, but Mississippi State gets on the right track here in game number 1. And Chet's going to agree with us. I feel like there's not going to be any disagreements here on week number 1, so we might as well just put 3 logos whenever you see them. So we have all Mississippi State getting the victory in week number 1. And oh my gosh, UT Martin at number 1, Georgia. You could just put up the 3 Gs.
The other
Could this
Bulldogs.
even be talked about? But Georgia, with Carson Beck, this is going to be his debut after Stetson Bennett is now with the Rams. So do you have anything to say about this matchup, or should we just continue on?
Not about this matchup, but I am pretty high on Georgia for the season. I mean, I know that they're introducing Carson Beck. I think he'll do just fine. Stetson Bennett definitely was a huge part of their success, but I don't think that he was the sole reason they were winning championships. And I think that defense is going to be pretty good again.
Yeah, we'll see if there's any doubters picking them 6-6 and 5-7 like they were claiming after they won their second.
Absolutely no worse than 11
national championship. I don't see even close. So, just look at their schedule. I mean, at worst, this is an 11-1 team, but I think that they go 12-0 and they run the table once again. So let's keep going on of our week 1 slate. The Texas A&M Aggies are home, looking for a way better season than they had last season. They did beat number 5 LSU to ruin LSU's hopes of getting to the playoffs. Would have been dashed anyway because LSU lost by 20 points to Georgia. So we have New Mexico at number 23, Texas A&M. Could this be the year that Texas A&M finally has their starting quarterback, Connor Weigman? They also have a new play caller, Bobby Petrino. He's also back in the SEC. We'll see what Petrino calls up. But how do you see the Aggies faring against the Lobos?
I think they get off to a good start. We've seen A&M have good starts and then they fizzle. They play Miami in the ensuing week, so they need to get things going quickly because that's a tough road game, regardless of how the Hurricanes will perform on the field this year. But yeah, I actually like where A&M is this year. I think they're appropriately ranked. I like Connor Weigman. I think this team could be sneaky just because we're not talking about them as much. I think everybody's tired of talking about them. People have praised them for no reason for 3 years, and I think people are let it go. And I think that's a time that A&M could really surprise some people. Maybe this is the year they put it together.
Yeah, A&M has to get off to a faster start this season. Going even to game number 1, they didn't really start off so hot against Sam Houston State. And then game number 2, we saw App State beat them. This year it flips. You got New Mexico. I think that this offense has to get it going. No more Devon A-Chain. Anai Smith is back from his injury. He is going to be an absolute star for them. You got Moose Muhammad. I think that's going to be Connor Weigman's go-to wide receiver. I think that the defense is going to keep them in ball games. It's just a matter of can the offense, be as elite as their defense is going to be. We'll definitely see as the weeks goes on. But against New Mexico is not a very good football team. They're one at the bottom of the Mountain West. So I think that Texas A&M should have no problem and handle their business in week 1 before the schedule gets trickier and trickier, especially when they go on the road to face off against Miami. And Chet is also going to go and say gig 'em this week against New Mexico. So the SEC looking so far is going to really take care of business in week 1 outside of Florida. But who knows? The Gators might, shock all of us like they did last year and upset Utah. Next one, we have the Vanderbilt Commodores back in action against Alabama A&M. So do you have the Doors moving to 2-0?
Yeah, I think they're the first ones, the 2 wins. I think they clean it up a little bit before they play Wake Forest.
Yeah, I think they cleaned it up too. Clark Lee probably said in his press conference that was definitely not what he expected. I do think that Vanderbilt's going to be able to watch the tape. Game 1, it's not always going to be your best game. You want your best game to be in the middle of the end of the season when the SEC schedule starts. So I think that Vanderbilt going to use another tune-up game before they hit the road to Wake Forest. So I think that the Commodores will advance to 2-0. And Chet also thinks that Vanderbilt will go to 2-0 as well. He has Alabama A&M getting upended by Vanderbilt. So the next one, we have Nick Saban in the Alabama Crimson Tide. I think that a lot of people around college football are going to be watching this matchup to pretty much say who's going to be their starting quarterback. Is it going to be Buckner? Is it going to be Milroe? Who knows? We don't even know at this point. We'll probably know, like I mentioned, probably game day, but they have to face off against Middle Tennessee State. I picked Alabama's defense for a reason, so I'm going to go ahead and say the Crimson Tide. So do you have Alabama and Nick Saban starting off the season before they have to host Texas?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think you'll see both quarterbacks. I think Milroe will get the start, but I do think they'll let both of them play a little bit. This team's going to be more run focused, I think, early in the season. Who is it? Jace McClellan? Is that their
Yeah.
guy this year? I mean, he's a pretty much a workhorse running back. Kind of reminds me of Brian Robinson, where not the guy that you heard all about like Mark Ingram or Derrick Henry or Jahmyr Gibbs, but still very physical runner. And I think that they'll kind of go through him to start the season, and then I think eventually they'll pick a quarterback. But ideally, one will stand out before the Texas game next week because you really don't want to be figuring it out on the fly against the Longhorns.
Yeah, you definitely don't. Texas is going to be one of those teams that are going to be vying and competing for that Big 12 title before they hit the road and join the likes of the SEC. And Chet is also going to go with Alabama. So, like on your report card, 3 A's throughout.
You
So,
want the
our final
3 A's.
two matchups are probably going to be the two best games of the weekend outside of Penn State and Virginia. The next one is the Duke's Mayo kickoff. It's a rivalry matchup. We saw this a couple of years ago with Dakereon Joyner being the starting quarterback for South Carolina. But this time it's an epic quarterback battle. Number 21 North Carolina versus South Carolina. Don't know how they're going to say who's the home team. I guess South Carolina's the home team since they're unranked. So I think that obviously the talk of the town is going to be Drake May versus Spencer Rattler. If you saw North Carolina's defense last year, I have no idea how it can be any worse than this year. So we will see. They did lose Josh Downs, so I think that Drake May is going to have to find some other weapons. And then South Carolina with Marshawn Lloyd now being at USC, who's going to be their starting running back. And I think that their defense, I think it continues to improve. It improved at the end of last season. So in this matchup, are you going to go with the SEC or ACC?
All right. I might be rocking the Carolina blue, as y'all can see.
Oh, no.
But I'm going with the garnet and black attack with the Gamecocks. I just think that South Carolina gets a statement win here. We've seen them play in Charlotte for a few season openers. They did a similar series against North Carolina State and split that. So I really like this matchup. I think it could be more of an annual thing. With college football ever evolving, I hope that we see some games like this still on the schedule. But yeah, I think Spencer Rattler and the Gamecocks win a shootout here. I mean, you alluded to the UNC defense not being that great. I think Drake May is definitely the unquestioned best player on the field, but he can only go as far as his defense can take him. And I think that Spencer Rattler can trade blows with him. I think this game, the winner gets into the 40s, and I think the Gamecocks take it 41-37.
Well, that's exactly the score that I have. I was going like 41-38. I think that these are two high offenses. It feels like week one, the defenses are going to be figuring out. Just two talented quarterbacks. I think it's going to be too much. So I'm going to go with South Carolina too. I think that South Carolina gets a statement victory here against North Carolina. I think it should be script. I think that South Carolina would give my vote to being a top 25 team. I think with the win, they will get into the top 25. They were receiving over 60 votes last time I saw it. Might have been updated. But I think that the Gamecocks get a close one here. This rivalry game is always close coming down to the wire. But I think that the South Carolina team will get off to a 1-0 start. And I think that they need it, especially with the Georgia game looming. You have Tennessee coming up too. So I think that the Gamecocks get off to a fast start here in the 2023 season. And it's a clean sweep. The Gamecocks get a clean sweep on the panel. So a lot of faith for
the don't call it a jinx, Gamecock fans.
Yeah, hopefully it's not a jinx for SEC fans. But our SEC Talk game of the week goes to Orlando. As we have a top 10 matchup, the only top 10 matchup of the season. We have to wait till Sunday. We have to wait an extra day. It's a Sunday night game. We saw the same game, LSU versus Florida State last year in New Orleans, came down to the wire. It took an LSU missed extra point for the Seminoles to get out of there with a victory. LSU, like I mentioned at the start, the prelude of the show, a lot of high expectations. Jaden Daniels is back for his senior season. On the defensive side, there's definitely some talent, but some question marks on the secondary. Florida State just feels like one of those teams that they're going to compete right there with Clemson and the ACC, especially with Jordan Travis being back. They really tapped into the transfer portal. I mean, their defense is absolutely loaded. So this could definitely be a defensive matchup. The main storyline here is Mason Smith. He's not going to be there for LSU's defense. He's suspended for this game. Don't even ask me for what, an improper benefit in the NIL world. I don't even know how that happened. So does LSU get their revenge against the Seminoles? Or are you going to go with Florida State, now being the quote unquote home team since the series shifts to the state of Florida? So this what ultimately feels like I feel like whoever wins this one is automatically on the track for the college football playoff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that either team could be eliminated from playoff contention should they lose this game closely. But yeah, I'm really high on Florida State. I do have them winning the ACC. And I think LSU will be a very good team. They could run out of the gate a little slow, and that's what's concerning me about this matchup. But I just feel like these teams are too equal and too even for them to not split this series. I think that Florida State came in and got the win in New Orleans. LSU was a play or two away from winning it. I think it's going to be very similar this year. I think LSU will be ready for this game. I think Florida State maybe even looks like the better team for much of the game, and LSU kind of shocks them at the end, maybe with a big defensive play. But I am definitely nervous. We've seen LSU struggle in these national showcase games the last couple of years against UCLA, Wisconsin, going a few years back, and then Florida State last year. So I'm kind of hoping this is more in line with the 2019 Miami game than it is any of the other ones I mentioned.
Yeah, LSU, it's been sometimes in game number one. It's also been sometimes, they gotten off to a fast start. Sometimes they also gotten off to a slow start. So maybe they meet in the middle. But this just feels like, pretty much a college football playoff semifinal atmosphere down there in Orlando. This is definitely going to be the game of the week, maybe even the game of the year. It's going to be hard to beat last year's game, just coming down to a heartbreaking loss for LSU. LSU has been circling this game. I think, Florida State is definitely one of my teams to potentially make the college football playoff. I think they will win the ACC. But I think that, like you mentioned, this is like two evenly matched teams for just feel like a Florida State sweep. So I'm going to give it to the purple and gold. I think that LSU and Jane Daniels get the job done here. I think it's going to come down to a field goal or something. It's going to come down to the last possession. Whoever has the ball last will probably win the game. This is going to be how this game's going to go, especially with two talented defenses. I'll go like a 27-24 game. I think it's definitely going to be low score and how it was last year. So I'm going to give it to LSU. And once again, hopefully this doesn't come down to a jinx for our SEC team there. We're all rolling with the Tigers. So in the two biggest matchup, of course, we sweep the panel. We'll see if that comes back to haunt us. So that's our week one slate. Let's dive in now to who do we have going to the SEC championship. And once again, we all going with the same teams, LSU versus Georgia. Once again, what are your thoughts about LSU winning the SEC West and also Georgia taking the East?
Well, first off, we do pull this independently. We don't just copycat each other. So that's how you end up with all the same logos on the screen for the first show. That's kind of expected. And then here in the championship, I'm kind of surprised nobody's taken the low-hanging fruit with Alabama. But I think this is the first year in a while you can not definitively say that Alabama's better than LSU. I mean, LSU's got the returning quarterback, a very deep wide receiver and running back room. Defensively, I think the teams are about even. So, why not LSU? They beat Alabama last year. And then we saw this matchup right here with Georgia and LSU a year ago. So I just think Jaden Daniels is going to make that next leap. I think he kind of came back to college football this year to prove that he can be an NFL prospect at quarterback. I think had he declared this past year, he would have been more of a developmental late round pick. So I think he's really coming for the throne in college football. And then on the Georgia side, it's not about the quarterback or any experience there. It's about just having a dynasty at defense. I think it's just the next man up mentality. And I think that Georgia, their schedule is favorable enough that they can kind of ease Carson back into the swing of things. And as long as they can get past South Carolina early on, I think they can just kind of breeze to another SEC's championship.
Yeah, so all rolling with the same picks. So we'll see if there's any parity in the SEC. Every year we always do. So we'll see if it's in our own conference. So let's get on now to our hot topics. We'll breeze through this pretty quickly here, and then we will close the book here on our week 1 preview. The first one, I mentioned this, the LSU versus Florida State game. Mason Smith suspended for the opener, an improper benefit of 2 years ago, signing autographs literally like a couple of weeks before that NIL was even legal. So we didn't see Mason Smith last year against Florida State. We saw him for a drive. He tore his ACL, but you just got to feel it for him. This is a guy that just wants to get on the football field, and the NCAA isn't allowing him to.
Yeah, I mean, a guy that he's going to be a top 20 pick in the draft, and it's going to feel like we saw him play 15 games at LSU.
All right, so our next one is on to the Florida Gators. Is this do or die for Billy Napier this season? Say, Florida goes 5-7 again, like they did last season, or 6-7, whatever they lost to Oregon State in the Las Vegas Bowl. If that happens once again, is Billy Napier out of Gainesville?
I think there's a possibility of it. I think he was a pretty cheap hire for Florida. I thought it was a good hire. I like the guy. I don't know if they'd can him after just 2 seasons, but if it's a really bad year, like 4-8 or something, then certainly they would consider it.
All right, to their rivals, can anyone compete with Georgia and dethrone them in the SEC?
I think that, we hit on 2 teams today, South Carolina, and then Tennessee's a team that you've studied a lot. So look for those 2 to contend, but, I would feel more confident declaring Georgia the SEC Eastern champion than I would LSU or Alabama in the West.
And then finally, out of all the new starting quarterbacks in the SEC, which new face, will have the best season out of all of them?
I think overall body of work, I'm going to go with Devin Leary, just with the experience factor there for Kentucky.
All right, and that's going to do it for our week 1 preview. We hope you enjoyed it. Next week, we'll get into our recap. There's going to be a lot to recap. We'll see if the SEC does really good. Based on our picks, I think they will do quite fine. A lot of people are facing off against cupcakes. We have LSU versus Florida State, North Carolina and South Carolina. Those will be the top 2 matchups that can really shift the playoff talk of those 4 teams combined. So thank you all for tuning into the show. Thank you, Wade, for once again. It's always a pleasure to having you on. So hope everybody enjoys the rest of your week, and we will see you back here next time on SEC Talk. Have a good one.